Always reminds me of Brother Taylor, back when he led singing. I can just see him doing this up here, can't you? One of these days, William, you'll be remembered for that as well.
The next time we sing, blessed be the name.
Blessed be the name. When you come up here. Yes. Anyway, Jonathan's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So. Yeah. Anyway, Brother Taylor. We'll see him this Saturday, and I encourage you, if you haven't come out, Mansfield anytime or in a while, come on out and have the service out there with us. It's always a good time. If you would open your Bibles to the book of 2 Samuel, chapter number 3. 2 Samuel, chapter number 3. And I don't know, Brother Tyler probably mentioned this, but if not, and even if he did, I'll mention it again. But next Wednesday, we've got camp, so we won't be having service here. I think on the piece of paper it says 6 o'clock. Does it say that on the calendar? That is accurate. So whatever that says, that is right. We'll be eating dinner at 5. We should be having our service at 6. And so we won't have service here at the church. We'll have it out at camp, and you'll get to come here. Brother Zach Fry deliver the Wednesday evening chapel service. And that'll happen every week of camp, just the same time, 6 o'clock Wednesday night. Come on out there and enjoy time together. I think it's always an encouragement to the kids. It's an encouragement to those that come. And obviously that's a good opportunity to visit with Pastor Calhoun, Brother Grant, all those preachers that come and spend the week with us. So, well, if you found your place in 2 Samuel chapter number 3, we're just going to begin by reading the first 5 verses. And so if you found your place there, read with me. You can read with me in your head. You don't have to read out loud. You can if you want, but that's not what I meant. So verse number 1 says, "Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David waxed stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul waxed weaker and weaker. And unto David were sons born in Hebron. The firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and his second, Chileab of Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite, and the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur, and the fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith, and the fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital, and the sixth, Ephraim by Eglah, David's wife. These were born to David in Hebron." And so if you remember back in one of the first chapters, I think it's chapter number 1, it just says that David was king in Hebron for 7 years. And so in that first 7 years, he had these 6 children. And as you can read, he had them by different wives. And the Bible says in verse number 1 there that as David's house grew stronger and stronger, Saul's house grew weaker and weaker. Of course, Saul had died. They cut his head off. They killed his sons. They cut their heads off. There's no one left except one son of Saul. And the Bible says that his house still remained, and yet it was only growing weaker. I think that's, David probably thought, and we know this, he wasn't looking forward to the death of Saul. He never rejoiced over the death of Saul. But he probably thought this: when Saul is gone, it's all going to be over. But it didn't end. It didn't go quietly. His house is still there. And to a degree, it's still a thorn in his side. And think about this, that in these 2 houses, the Bible says that David's grew stronger. And I think it grew stronger in number, right? Literally, it describes 6 children that he had. David was gaining strength, not just in a military sense, but also in a family sense. The Bible tells us, if you would turn with me to Psalm 127, 127th Psalm. The Bible describes what it means to have a children and to build a home. And this is not a psalm of David, but it's a psalm of Solomon. He says in verse number 1, it says it's a song of degrees for Solomon. So maybe it was a psalm of David. I apologize. A psalm for Solomon. He says, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies at the gate." The Bible is telling us this, that a man who's house is full of children, that can pass something on to his children, that has his children there. And in this time, it was of great importance to have children, particularly those that were royal, to pass their royalty and all of their things onto. But the Bible doesn't say that's the only reason to have kids. He says this, that if you're going to build a house, it's actually the Lord that's going to build it for you. I know this. I have 5 beautiful kids because God gave me 5 kids. I could look down and say, well, look what I made. Look at my beautiful daughters. Look how beautiful. That's all me, which is what I tell people, right? It's all me. If we ever have an ugly one, then I'll say it's Kaylee's kid, but I'm joking, obviously. We're never going to have any ugly kids, right? They hate it when I talk about them. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, the Bible says that David here was strengthened, and I think this, part of it was this. He was strengthening himself because he was having kids. He was building his house. When you've got young kids, you have the greatest cheerleading team of all. Nobody cheers for me harder than my close family does. I think, as they get younger, David's going to find out that his kids aren't always on his side. But I think this, one of the reasons you ought to have kids, if you're young and able to have kids, is this. They're going to be your biggest supporters. You want people to support you? Have kids. They love you. They think you're the greatest. At least mine do for now. We'll see what happens when they get older. But I think do that. But also this, it's an opportunity for you to have an impact on the world after you leave. Right? I may not have a great influence on too many people. As a pastor, I might more so than other people will, but I think this, I won't have a greater influence on anybody than I do my kids. You want to make the world a better place? Start having kids and teach them how to be good people. You know how we're losing the war for good people in this world is we stop having kids. You know who's winning the war? The people that are having kids and teaching them what is right and what's wrong. And so David here, he was having kids. Now, I mentioned this. He had them by several different wives. I read this thing recently. Somebody they wrote a post in defense of polygamy, as if that was biblical, and I thought that was so strange. But you know that one of David's faults was that he multiplied many wives unto himself, which the Bible said specifically he was not supposed to do, right? That nobody ever praises David for having multiple wives. I know I just told you to turn there to Psalms, but turn back with me to Deuteronomy 17. And we've read this a few times. I remember reading it when we were going through the story of Saul when he became king, right? God had said, here's what's going to happen when you get a king. And he gives not just a detail of here's what's going to happen when you get a king, but he also gives them some instructions for what to do or what the king is supposed to do and not do. And so it says in Deuteronomy 17, starting in verse 14, when thou art come unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And of course, he's speaking now to the children of Israel while they're in the wilderness. They haven't even gotten to the promised land yet. But he says this, thou shalt possess it and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. But, and here's the important part, these next 2 verses are important. But he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall not henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. You notice there's a pattern there. He's not really to multiply to himself anything. He's the king, and you read through the New Testament, and what do you find out about leaders? They're not to be these great men who have gained all of these things and add stuff to themselves. But Jesus says this, the greatest is the one who's the greatest at being a servant. I think he meant that for his kings in Israel. The greatest king would be the one who's the most servant-like. You know that David was probably, of all the kings of Israel, he was the most servant-like. He gave of himself. He went out and fought. He went out and risked his own neck for his people. And when he failed, it's when he wasn't doing that. God told him specifically in there also, do not go and multiply. Why would a king multiply wives to himself? It's not just to have more wives and to have more kids, but they use that as a political tool to make allies and to make alliances between other kings. It says in verse number 3, back here of 2 Samuel 3, it says, at the end of that, it says, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. And so Maacah was the daughter of a king that would have been considered a heathen king, right, or a Gentile king. And so this marriage, it wasn't that they met each other and fell in love and had a baby, right? It was an agreement made between these two kings to make an alliance. And so David was teaming up with this guy, and I would say probably this was a guy who was on the north side. It would have been an intimidation tactic against Israel. And what's the son that he had with this woman? His name was Absalom. And if you remember the story, what happens, we'll cover it eventually. But Absalom gathered the nation of Israel unto himself against his father. And so what probably started as an idea that David had to benefit himself and his kingdom actually became something that it was a grief to him and became a shame to him. I think what David did there is that he probably made this decision based on his own understanding and not on that of the Lord. But either way, David was adding to himself children. He was adding to him his house strength in that sense, while at the same time Saul's sons had all died except one, and in the next chapter the last one dies. And so it wasn't necessarily that these men were getting in strength. Obviously, Saul was gone, but rather their houses and their kingdoms, one was strengthening, one was weakening. And so in that sense, they also were growing in strength and power. Right? Verse number 1 says this, that there was long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And we get the sense that David was winning that war. Judah was winning while Israel, with Abner and Ishbosheth, was losing. In fact, if you remember in the last chapter, verses 30 and 31, after this small little battle that took place, it says, Joab returned from following Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, there lacked of David's servants 19 men in Asahel. That's 20 men that he lost in that battle. But the servants of David had smitten of Benjamin and of Abner's men, so that 360 men had died. And so in this one battle, and I imagine that's the thing that kept happening again and again and again. And so they were losing. But also this, and this will be the last area where I talk about how they were strengthened and weakened, and that would be in the area of influence. It's not just enough to have a strong family and to have a lot of power, but David also was going to need this if he was going to be a king. He needed to have influence. He needed to have those. He wasn't going to rule people just by putting his thumb down on them and telling them what to do. No, he was going to rule different from most kings in that he was going to have the people on his side. Whatever you say, that's what we'll do. Whatever you say, that's what we want. And that's why Absalom later on, when he wins the people to himself, that's the only way he's going to defeat David, is if he can convince them that he's better. They weren't going to turn on David on their own. I think that's what David started to grow in, was in his influence. I think it was easy to see that God was with David because he's the one that keeps winning and everyone else keeps losing. Right? He keeps gaining victories while Ishbosheth and Abner were losing. And then what happens in a moment, we're going to read this, is that Abner leaves Ishbosheth and joins himself to David. I think he's going to gain all the influence that Abner had as well. And so in those 7 years, this is all that happened to David. And I think David, when Saul died, he was supposed to be made king, but now 7 years have passed and he's still not king. Sometimes it takes a long time for you to get where you think you ought to be. And this constant battle going between his men, his house, and the house of Saul, I think it serves as a good picture of here's what happens when you get saved, right? I'm saved. I'm guaranteed to one day defeat sin and death and go to heaven and never have to worry about it again. But I'm not there yet. You know what happens? There's a constant battle going on. If you read in the book of Romans, I just want to read a little bit in Romans chapter number 7. The Apostle Paul describes a battle that takes place within the life of a believer. This is not somebody who's sinful, who's struggling with their sin. No, this is somebody that's saved, who struggles with their flesh. Any Christian that tells you they don't sin and they don't struggle with sin is a liar. And that's the sin. It's just part of it. The Apostle Paul writes here in Romans chapter 7, and he writes about it in chapter 6 as well. We could read half of the book of Romans to illustrate this. But he says in verse number 14, "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. For that which I do, I allow not. For what I would, that do I not. But what I hate, that do I." You ever do something and think, I hate that I did that? Why did I do that? That's what Paul's describing. The sin in his life is oftentimes is something that I hate. If then I do that which I would not, I consent unto the law that it is good. Now then, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. For I know that in me, that is, in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. For the good that I would I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. Now if I do that I would not, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me. I find then a law, that when I would do good, evil is present with me. And I'll stop that, but you understand that there's this, every time I want to do what's right, there's going to sometimes be a temptation to get me to do what's wrong. Right? Next week when we have camp, we're going to want to do what's right, but there's going to be a temptation to do what is wrong. Sometimes it's to do what is easy or what we should not do. And I think this, the longer you live, you fight this battle, but it should go like David, where you over time get stronger and stronger, or your spirit and that spirit within you gets stronger and stronger, and your flesh gets weaker and weaker. That's why I think sometimes you meet older Christians and older believers, they just seem to have they seem to walk with God closer than I do. I don't think it's anything about them. I think a lot of times it's this. It's time. They've had more time to battle and to fight and to gain experience than I have. It's not that I cannot do it. It's just that, man, sometimes it takes time. And ultimately, we know this. David's going to sit on the throne. But he had to go through a period of battle. David's victory, then, was not going to be due to his abilities, his wisdom, his greatness. His victory would be due to this. He just obeyed God, and God gave him what he promised him. I think this, maybe God allowed him to go through that battle for so long because he knew this. It was going to try him, and it was going to make him into a better leader. James tells us that the trying of your faith worketh patience. You know why you go through times where your patience is tried or your faith is tried? Because God's trying to give you more patience. You know how you and I deal with people who are hard to deal with is with patience. I just don't have any patience. I've heard that so many times, and I'm tired of it. I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't have any patience for it. Look, nobody has the same amount of patience, but I think this, God will put you through trials of your faith because he wants to build your patience. And then Peter says this, that the trial of your faith being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. He says that when your faith is tried, that's more precious than gold. We think it's bad for us, but man, it is good for you to be tried because it makes you into a better person, a better Christian. And so that's what happens at the beginning of this chapter. But the main narrative of this story is really what happens after, which describes the downfall and the ultimate death of Abner. And it says in verse number 6, it came to pass, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner made himself strong for the house of Saul. It says that Abner made himself strong, and yet he was not strong enough. You know why David was stronger than Abner? Because God made David strong. You going to make yourself strong? You're going to fall one day. You lift yourself up, you will fall. But you let God lift you up, you cannot fall. I think, man, it's so backwards to human nature, isn't it? I want to lift myself up and make myself great. But I know that if I do that, all I will do is fall flat on my face. If I'd humble myself before God, he will lift me up. Let's go ahead and keep reading here. Verse 7, it says this. And Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, Wherefore hast thou gone in unto my father's concubine? Then was Abner very wroth for the words of Ishbosheth, and said, Am I a dog's head, which against Judah do show kindness this day unto the house of Saul thy father, to his brethren and to his friends, and have not delivered thee into the hand of David, that thou chargest me today with a fault concerning this woman? So do God to Abner, and more also, except as the Lord hath sworn to David, even so I do to him, to translate the kingdom from the house of Saul, and to set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan even to Beersheba. And he could not answer Abner a word again, because he feared them. So here's what happened, is that Ishbosheth is accusing Abner of taking unto himself one of Saul's concubines. And so according to the Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary, it says this, that in the East, the wives and concubines of a king are the property of his successor to this extent that for a private person to aspire to marry one of them would be considered a virtual advance of pretensions to the crown. In other words, if he did that, it looked as if he's trying to take the crown for himself. I'm going to take the old king's wives or concubines to myself. That means this: I'm going to take the kingdom to myself. And so when Ishbosheth confronts Abner, perhaps it is this to say, what are you trying to do? He maybe felt threatened by Abner, threatened by this move that he made. So then again in that verse 6, that phrase where he said Abner made himself strong in the house of Saul, it could go on to mean very specifically he was trying to make himself strong as the house of Saul, or try to take it from himself. Now, we don't know for sure whether he even did this, but rather he was accused of doing so, right? And he never denies that he did it, but he also never admits that he did it either. Listen to how he reacts to it in verse number 8. He said, "Am I a dog's head?" Have you ever said that before? Sometimes one of the girls will snap at me. I'll say, "Hey, am I a dog's head?" He goes on to say this: "Am I a dog's head which against Judah do show kindness this day?" You're acting like I'm turning against you, but all I've done is work for you. And he describes all the things he's done. He's shown kindness and shown all of these things. I've not delivered you into the hand of David, and here you are accusing me. How dare you accuse me of such a thing? But then in his anger, he turns around in those other verses that we read. He says this: I'm basically going to turn from you. I'm going to turn to David, and I know this: God's going to take the kingdom from you and give it to David. I think this moment of accusation from Ishbosheth, I don't think it was the one decision when Abner finally said, "Fine, I'm going to go serve David." I think probably there were a lot of things going on, but this was the thing that was going to work in his best interest. You remember back when Israel set a king over them, it was Abner who got Ishbosheth and made him king. That's what the Bible says. Abner made him king. Why did he do that? Because it was in his best interest. As the leader of Saul's army, he thought David would come and try to kill him, take him. So he thought, we'll set up our own kingdom, we'll stand against David. Well, now that they've spent the last few years losing and losing and losing, I think Abner's thinking, you know what? I think it's time to cut my losses and join the other side. And so he turns and says, I'm going to go stand with David against you. I think he claims it's because God, it says in verse number 9, "So do God to Abner and more also, except as the Lord hath sworn to David, even so I do to him." It says this: God has sworn he's going to give it, so that's why I'm following him. I don't believe that. You can believe that if you want, but I don't, because if he really believed God had given the kingdom to David, he wouldn't have set up his own kingdom in the first place. I think this: he thinks, I'm going to go join myself to David, and I'm going to set myself in the best place to prosper under him. It seems to me more like an act of revenge and an act of his own self-interest. And this is, either way, it's one of those instances where a man that he doesn't really do what is right, and yet God uses it to do what God has said he was going to. God uses it to accomplish his own will. Because Abner turns on Ishbosheth, the kingdom is going to end up all given to David anyway. And so Ishbosheth's answer in verse number 11 was this: he could not answer because he feared him. So here he accuses him of sin, accuses him of taking this wife from his father. And how does it? Abner responds with aggression. He's angry, and Ishbosheth can't say anything back to him. You know why? Because he was weak and useless. He should never have been a king in the first place. He was afraid. He's afraid of Abner. He was afraid of David. And so here's what he did with his life. He just laid down and let people walk all over him. You know, I think there's a lot of people that probably are like Ishbosheth. Maybe they got a lot of bark to them, but they have no bite, right? And so they like to yell and scream, but if it really push came to shove, they just lay down. You know, you and I as Christians, God does not expect us to just lay down. I think there are certain things that we're supposed to fight for, but we have to choose our battles, right? God doesn't expect his people to just be out there fighting for anything and everything. No, I think we ought to stand for what is right. But at the end of the day, God is going to win because evil is going to ultimately bow down to God. It says in Psalm 62, verse 3, David wrote this. He said, "How long will ye imagine mischief against a man? Ye shall be slain, all of you. As a bowing wall shall ye be, and as a tottering fence." In other words, like a wall bowing down. That's what this man was. You should have been a king. Should have at least said to Abner, "Get out of my sight. You're not serving me anymore." He didn't even say that. He said nothing. And so here's a man who would just bow to the man that he feared. So what happens next? We find that Abner leaves Ishbosheth to make a league with David. It says in verse 12, Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf, saying, Whose is the land? Saying also, Make thy league with me, and behold, my hand shall be with thee to bring about all Israel unto thee. And he said, Well, I will make a league with thee, but one thing I require of thee, that is, thou shalt not see my face, except thou first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when thou comest to see my face. And David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, Deliver me my wife, Michal, which I espoused to me for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, even from Phaltiel, the son of Laish. And her husband went with her along, weeping behind her to Bahurim. Then said Abner unto him, Go, return. And he returned. And Abner had communication with the elders of Israel, saying, Ye sought for David in time past to be king over you. Now then do it, for the Lord hath spoken of David, saying, By the hand of my servant David I will save my people Israel out of the hand of the Philistines, and out of the hand of all their enemies. And Abner also spake in the ears of Benjamin, and Abner went also to speak in the ears of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel, and that seemed good to the whole house of Benjamin. So Abner came to David to Hebron, and 20 men with him. And David made Abner and the men that were with him a feast. And Abner said unto David, I will arise and go, and will gather all Israel unto my lord the king, that they may make a league with thee, and that thou mayest reign over all that thine heart desireth. And David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. And behold, the servants of David and Joab came from pursuing a troop, and brought in a great spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he was gone in peace. And so the next thing that Abner does, he doesn't just say, I'm leaving you, Ishbosheth, but he goes and joins himself to David. And so once again, it's Abner was useful to the cause of God, not because he was doing what's right, but God can somehow take the evil work of man and use it for his own good. That's a fascinating thing. And it's one that I cannot wrap my head around. But it's almost like if you're playing a game of chess and you come to attack me and I have a move that can take that attack and use it for my good. I'm not good enough at chess to know what those moves are, but somebody does. Ryan probably does. He plays some chess. He doesn't know. He's my girls, I taught them how to play chess. I taught them the rules of chess. I didn't teach them how to play it. But I think there's this theology that God has determined everything that's already happened, that he's decided how it's going to go, and that's how Abner becomes useful to God, is that God decided for Abner what he was going to do. But I don't believe that. I think that God is so good that no matter what move you make, he turns it for his own good. You remember the story of Joseph when his brothers sold him into slavery? God didn't go to his brothers and give him a vision and said, you're going to go and sell him to slavery. No, they did that of their own accord, out of their own wickedness, out of their own sin. And yet Joseph in the end recognized in Genesis 50 verse 20, he said, As for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. I liked what Matthew Henry wrote here about this portion of Samuel. He said, Enemies are sometimes made a footstool, not only to be trodden upon, but to be ascended by. Right? Abner was going to be a way for David, not just to step on him, but to rise up and to look greater in the end than he did before. He comes to David, he says, Make a league with me. Make a deal. And David says, I will, on one condition. You're going to bring me the wife that Saul had given me when he was still king. She was his first wife. She would have been his rightful wife. And so in asking for this condition, we find that David, I think perhaps it's that he still cares about her. He still misses her. He still loves her. But I think more so it's probably this. He still had a respect for Saul and to carry that lineage into his own kingdom. I think he still had enough respect for the kingdom of Saul to bring her back to himself. He had no ill will towards Saul's family. But either way, that was the condition. And Ishbosheth agreed to David's terms, and he sent and took Michal from her second husband, what was his name? Phaltiel, and brought him back to David. And so you see partially what this whole thing creates is a huge mess, right? If everyone in this story had just stuck to God's plan of one man and one woman for the rest of their lives, you wouldn't have any of this happening. It's all the sin and the wickedness of man and their own imaginations that brings about these things, right? It brings about problems. And I think this guy who had been married to her followed the whole way weeping and crying. But really, he had himself to thank for being so upset, because he's the one who married somebody that still was married and belonged to another man. But either way, I just make that point to say this. God's not condoning, I don't think, or recognizing and saying, yes, I think it's right to have multiple wives. I think all we see is the problems that it caused for other people. It becomes a headache and a pain to them. And so then what happens, verse 17 on, the elders of Israel are brought to David. If Abner was going to follow David, all of these elders that followed Abner would follow. His opinion and his recommendation carried a lot of weight. And so he carries them and takes them to David. They sit down and they have a feast together. And he gives them two reasons why they should ally themselves or recognize David as the king. The first is this. In verse number 17, he says, "Ye sought for David in times past to be king over you." He says, don't you remember? You wanted him to be your king. I don't know. You remember back when they were singing that song, Saul has killed his thousands, David killed his 10,000s? I think they were thinking this, man, wouldn't it be great one day if David was our king? They loved David when he was the one going out and fighting their battles and standing up for him. What has happened since Saul became king and since he's died is the Philistines have been moving in and taking ground. And Israel, the whole north part of Israel at this time, a lot of it belonged to the Philistines. And so he's reminding these people, hey, remember when you wanted David to be your king? Why was that? Because he's the one who could fight off the Philistines. And then he goes on and tells them the second reason is because God said in verse number 18, "The Lord hath spoken of David, saying, By the hand of my servant David I will save my people Israel out of the hand of the Philistines and out of the hand of their enemies." And so God is telling him, hey, you need to, Abner is telling them, hey, not only did you want him to be king, but we know this, God has promised that if he's our king, he's going to deliver us. And so they were willing to follow and go where Abner left, because this is a guy who's been trying to do that very thing for the last, I think if you read this, it's about 2 or 3 years. He's been trying to rid Israel of the Philistines. He hasn't done it, and he's telling them this is the guy that can do it. Now again, he's doing it not because he really loves David. I don't think he really even believes the Lord's promise. I think it's this. He's doing it for his own benefit and for his own gain, and yet he does it. And so David brings them over. David had prepared a feast, and that was their way of accepting both sides of this agreement, this arrangement. And when Abner leaves, he leaves in peace. He's feeling like, hey, I've saved myself from falling when Saul's house falls. I'm in a very good position to succeed when David is king. And man, I'm very pleased with myself. I think this, as a person, he should be pleased with himself. He made some very wise moves. He dealt his hand and he played it, or he got dealt a hand and he played it very well. The problem was he did it according to his own wisdom and his own knowledge. And this whole time he kept making decisions for himself and never once considered really what God wanted him to do. So what happens next, you find in verse number 22, "And behold, as we read, the servants of David and Joab came from pursuing a troop, and brought in a great spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he was gone in peace. And when Joab and all the host that was with him were come, they told Joab, saying, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he hath sent him away, and he's gone in peace. And then Joab came to the king and said, What hast thou done? Behold, Abner came unto thee. Why is it that thou hast sent him away? And he is quite gone. Thou knowest Abner the son of Ner, that he came to deceive thee, and to know thy going out and thy coming in, and to know all that thou doest. And when Joab was come out from David, he sent messengers after Abner, which brought him again from the well of Sirah, but David knew it not. And when Abner was returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him quietly, and smote him there under the 5th rib, and he died for the blood of Asahel his brother. And afterward, when David heard it, he said, I and my kingdom are guiltless before the Lord forever, from the blood of Abner the son of Ner. Let it rest on the head of Joab, and on all his father's house, and let there not fail from the house of Joab one that hath an issue, or that is a leper, or that leaneth on a staff, or that falleth on the sword, or that lacketh bread. So Joab and Abishai his brother slew Abner because he had slain their brother Asahel at Gibeon in the battle. And so you find what happens to Abner in the end is that he's killed. He was killed. And I don't think he was justly killed. He was unjustly killed. And he was killed by a man out of anger, seeking revenge. But isn't it true that so many people that live that kind of life where they seek their own tend to run into people that do the same and end up suffering the consequences from both of them? When Joab comes back from fighting, he finds out that Abner was there. Of course, he was angry. If you weren't here, if you don't remember the story, it was Abner who killed Joab's brother, Asahel, when they were in the battle. He killed him. He stuck him through with a spear under the fifth rib. That seems to be the common place to kill somebody. That's the place of choice to stab somebody. I don't know. Did they have to count 5 down? Seems like it would, if you're getting that close. Hey, wait a second. What are you counting my ribs for? Anyway, he's angry. He's speaking to David. Why did you let him go? You know he's only come here to deceive you, to spy you out so that he can turn on you. Of course, that wasn't true. Joab's not speaking out of knowledge. He's just speaking out of hate and out of anger. And so he's telling him, you should have not sent him away in peace. Joab could not see Abner any other way than as an enemy. And yet David somehow could see him as an ally, as not an enemy. It's the same way that he saw Saul. When everyone else came to David and said, you've got a chance, you should kill him. He's your enemy. David said, he's not my enemy. I should not take his life. And that's the mindset, I think, that's different between somebody who's following the Lord and somebody that's not. You know, you and I ought to look around and recognize that nobody really is our enemy. And we've got no reason to take revenge on somebody. So what happens, of course, he invites him back unbeknownst to David, takes him aside, kills him. In the end, I think ultimately Abner got what he deserved. If we're honest, he killed Asahel, he got killed. He set himself up against God's king, and he lost. But ultimately, Joab was also wrong in doing it. He was not the judge. He had no authority to bring judgment on Abner. And so the other thing that he did was he placed David in a very bad place where it looked like David had turned on Abner and on Israel. Man, that deal that David just made, that could have all been undone because of the reckless and the arrogant and the angry acts of one guy. Man, they could have said, we're not joining you. But David's reaction was different. Look in verse number 31. It says, and David said to Joab and to all the people that were with him, rend your clothes and gird you with sackcloth and mourn before Abner. And King David himself followed the bier. And they buried Abner in Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner. And all the people wept, and the king lamented over Abner and said, died Abner as a fool dieth? Thy hands were not bound, nor thy feet put into fetters. As a man falleth before wicked men, so fellest thou. And all the people wept again over him. And when all the people came to cause David to eat meat while it was yet day, David sware, saying, so do God to me, and more also, if I taste bread or aught else, till the sun be down. And all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as whatsoever the king did pleased all the people. For all the people and all Israel understood that day that it was not of the king to slay Abner, the son of Ner. And the king said unto his servants, know ye not that there is a prince and a great man fallen this day in Israel? I am this day weak, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, be too hard for me. The Lord shall reward the doer of evil according to his wickedness. And so David mourned and caused everyone else to mourn. Even those guys that killed him, he made them mourn, at least visibly to everyone else, for the actions that they did. He would not eat. He did all of this so that people could see, and whether he did it for this or whether it was just an effect of it, they saw that he cared for Abner, that he did not design and carry out this thing. And it's a very important thing to notice in verse 36 that it says, all the people took notice. It pleased them, as whatsoever the king did pleased all the people. That's that influence that David gained that Saul had lost. They were going to follow him because what he did was pleasing to them. They could see he was doing it not for himself, but because it was the right thing to do. In 2 Samuel, as we just read, verse number 37, it said, all the people and all Israel understood that it was not of the king to slay Abner, the son of Ner. You know that everyone would have looked at David and said, you should have killed him when he came. It wasn't just Joab, but a lot of people would have, because he's the guy that set himself up as your enemy. And as I said, David did not ever see him as the enemy, though everyone else did. I think this, you and I, we look around, it's easy to look at other people and think those people are the enemy. Isn't it? Think about these people who want to take away the rights of the church and of Christians. Those are the enemy, aren't they? I was talking with my brother-in-law this over the last couple of weeks, and he's telling me about some of the things that are happening up in Canada and a lot of the liberal places up there where they are taking away rights. They're telling you what you can and not say from a pulpit, and they'll arrest you. Those people are our enemy, aren't they? No, they're not our enemy. They are being used by the enemy, but those people are one decision away of becoming an ally. They're the same as Saul of Tarsus, who set out as an enemy, but Jesus Christ never looked at Saul and said, you're my enemy. And I think that's the difference. Christ never looked at those people who nailed him to a cross and said, you guys are my enemy. Or those people in town who were shouting, crucify him, crucify him. He doesn't look at the lost world and say, these are all my enemies, but rather he sees them as a sheep without a shepherd, lost and alone. And what he's done is he's got this life preserver that he's given to us to throw out to them, to save them. You know what will happen is people will die saying, no, I'm your enemy. But never Christ looking down saying, you were my enemy the whole time. I think this Abner made himself the enemy of David, but David never said, yes, he's my enemy. Look how he said he was a prince. He was a great man that died this day. We ought to mourn this guy. Book of Romans chapter 5 verse 8 says, but God commendeth his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. When I was his enemy, he still loved me and cared for me. I think that's what we see in the life of David, is he really was a man after God's own heart in that sense that he loved people who hated him. He cared about people who set themselves against him. I think this, man, you ought to have children, teach them how to be good, how to live for the Lord. But then also have an influence on the people around you. Instead of being angry and lashing out at people, we ought to pray for people. We ought to be trying to be kind and caring toward them. We ought to pray that God would change their hearts, would move them toward themselves. If you would stand with me, I'd like to have a time of invitation as God has spoken to us tonight. Maybe you got something you'd like to say to him. Father, I thank you for this evening and